All right, let's dive right into this explainer and untangle the wild history of Frederick Barbarossa, aka Redbeard. This guy was born right into the absolute political chaos of the 12th century, and he spent a staggering 40-year reign desperately trying to glue a shattered empire back together. But, when we really look closely at his track record, this incredible contradiction pops up. We're looking at a man whose most spectacular, frankly embarrassing failures somehow directly paved the way for his absolute greatest masterstrokes.
To make sense of all this, we've structured today's explainer into 5 quick chapters: the fragmented empire, the Italian quagmire, a 12th century renaissance, the final march, and finally, a paradoxical legacy. Let's get into it.
Chapter 1. The Fragmented Empire, a Broken Inheritance.
Okay, so let's set the stage. The world Frederick inherited when he took the throne in 1152 was, well, it was a mess. Charlemagne's grand unified vision, totally gone, just dissolved. Instead, try to imagine running a country where over 1,000 different dukes, bishops, and local warlords are all acting like CEOs of their own independent startups. They paid Frederick almost zero respect. The title of Holy Roman Emperor had basically lost all its bite. So he makes it his absolute life's mission to force this massive fractured puzzle back together. But right at home, he's dealing with this incredibly bitter, exhausting domestic rivalry. On one side, you've got the Guelphs. They back the powerful House of Wealth, led by some seriously formidable guys like Henry the Lion. And on the flip side, the Ghibellines, who supported Frederick's own Hohenstaufen dynasty. To wield any actual power, Frederick had to play this high-stakes game of whack-a-mole, constantly balancing, placating, and, occasionally crushing these domestic rivals, just to keep Germany from totally imploding into civil war.
And honestly, his early military resume, not great. Before he was even emperor, a young Frederick marched off on the Second Crusade, and it was an absolute, almost comical catastrophe. I mean, we are talking flash floods wiping out his forces in the Balkans, constant, grueling Turkish ambushes in Anatolia, and the absolute kicker, a disastrous 5-day siege of Damascus that ended in an immediate, humiliating retreat back to Jerusalem. He basically limped home, having achieved absolutely zero.
Moving on to Chapter 2, the Italian quagmire, decades of war.
So, after becoming king of Germany, Frederick turns his eyes south. If Germany was fractured, the Italian half of his empire was just openly defiant. Over the span of 20 years, he launches 5 brutal, highly repetitive campaigns to try and crush these independent Italian city-states. And Frederick, not exactly a guy who took no for an answer. In 1162, he literally leveled the rebellious city of Milan, just destroyed it. But the cities simply grouped up, formed the Lombard League, and kept right on fighting. His armies get decimated by malaria in Rome, and the whole mess finally peaks in 1176 with his absolute worst military defeat at the Battle of Legnano. He was actually knocked off his horse and briefly presumed dead.
But it wasn't all just swords and sieges. To try and keep his grip on power, Barbarossa kicked off a massive rift in the Catholic Church that dragged on for 22 years. See, when Pope Alexander III was elected and dared to oppose Frederick's supreme authority, Frederick just ruthlessly set up not 1, not 2, but 3 different rival anti-popes over 2 decades. Talk about stubborn, right? He practically shattered the harmony of the medieval church, all to make sure Rome couldn't dictate terms to his empire.
All right, Chapter 3, a 12th century renaissance, law and order.
Now, we're going to pivot a bit, because in 1158, Frederick drops this groundbreaking decree called the Authentica Habita. And this is wild. The exact same guy known for battlefield brutality and burning down cities was actually a key architect of Europe's early intellectual revival. This decree formally locked in the rights and protections for students and teachers at the University of Bologna. By officially protecting these traveling scholars, he literally laid the legal foundation for Europe's very first universities. It became the ultimate blueprint that places like Oxford, Cambridge, and Paris would soon desperately try to copy.
Now, let's be real. He wasn't just funding education out of the goodness of his heart. He had a massive political headache. The church's canon law and those old Germanic traditions were severely capping his imperial power. He needed a workaround. So what does he do? He hires the most brilliant legal minds around to bypass those rules by digging up the ancient Roman Justinian Code. By reviving these 6th century Byzantine laws, he suddenly had the perfect legal loopholes to justify having supreme authority over the Pope and the Italian city-states. It was a completely brilliant, highly calculated way to centralize his power using pure intellect.
Which brings us to Chapter 4, the final march, the Third Crusade. Fast forward to 1187. The now 67-year-old emperor answers a desperate call. Jerusalem had fallen to the legendary Muslim leader Saladin, and all of Europe's greatest monarchs are mobilizing. Now, Frederick was absolutely not going to repeat the chaotic mistakes of his youth. This time, he meticulously assembled a massive, ultra-disciplined German force to march east alongside the kings of England and France. We're talking a staggering 15,000 troops anchored by 3,000 heavily armored knights. It was a terrifying, well-oiled military machine that literally sent shockwaves of anxiety all the way into Saladin's camp.
But the grand climax to his epic military career? Yeah, it never happened. On June 10, 1190, while marching through southern Turkey, he tried to take a shortcut across the Salif River, and it ended in absolute tragedy. Whether he was thrown from his horse or just tried to cross on foot, his heavy armor dragged him right under, and the great emperor drowned. Without his imposing, larger-than-life leadership, his mighty army just instantly fractured. They basically melted away and mostly went back home to Europe. Just a stunningly anticlimactic end.
Chapter 5. A Paradoxical Legacy. Myth versus Reality.
Before we can really judge this 40-year reign, we've got to clear up a massive historical distortion. You might know that in 1941, Nazi Germany named their invasion of the Soviet Union Operation Barbarossa. But listen, that was based on a complete misconception. Hitler somehow believed Frederick was this great champion of Germanic eastward expansion. The actual reality? Frederick couldn't have cared less about the East. His true ambitions were strictly focused south on Italy, and just consolidating power right at home in Germany. So when we look at his actual achievements side by side, this incredibly stark contrast jumps right out at you. His grandest, most famous military campaigns, absolute unmitigated disasters. He completely failed at Damascus, got crushed at Legnano, and drowned in a river before he even saw combat in the Third Crusade. And yet he repeatedly survived and thrived through these absolute masterstrokes of diplomacy, like marrying his son into the Sicilian royal family to completely encircle the Pope, or skillfully keeping his domestic rivals in check.
And right here is the real secret to his ultimate triumph. Despite losing that brutal 20-year war at Legnano, the diplomatic treaty he pushed through afterwards, the Peace of Constance, was sheer genius. He compromised. He let the Italian cities manage their own internal affairs, but in return, they had to swear an oath of fealty to him, let him appoint their senior officials, and officially recognize his overarching imperial court. By bending just a little bit, he finally secured the exact imperial control he'd been chasing with a sword for 3 decades.
He pulled the Holy Roman Empire back from the brink of total collapse, and he sparked an intellectual renaissance that helped shape modern Europe. But managing a wildly decentralized empire like that required an iron-fisted ruler. And almost immediately after his dynasty ended, the empire just fragmented all over again. So we leave you with this final thought to consider about his true historical footprint. Was Frederick Barbarossa truly a great medieval monarch, or were his hard-fought accomplishments at the end of the day somewhat illusory? Take a moment to really think on that. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.